anything that is filled with something that you would assume was going to come to your device that makes any sense whatsoever. You see, I want to keep people on their heels. I want to keep people guessing. I want people to think that every time something goes wrong, every time a wrong button is pushed, every time the wrong clip is shown, every time the audio goes haywire, every time the cameras vanish, I don't want you to look at that as a malfunction or some sort of incredible naivete and incompetence on our part. No, I want you to see it as the texture of Brad Stine Has Issues. Always more of a surreal Salvador Dali kind of vibe. You don't know what's coming, and that's what's coming. I see something coming because I didn't see that coming. If you can understand anything about what I just said, or if it's compelling or intriguing to you, then you belong right here. If, on the other hand, you're finding yourself in anxiety and confused and frustrated and wondering why you stumbled upon this podcast, well, I recommend you take off, because this is only for people who are so on edge that I'm the only one that can talk them down from that edge. That's why God's Comic is here. And that's why Brad Stine Has Issues was invented. If it's your first time, buckle up. And if it's your second time, prepare to leap out of the car as it's moving, because you know exactly what's coming, which means you don't have any idea. Welcome, my friends, to another Monday night edition of Brad Stine Has Issues. Sounds a little like this. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is God's Comic, Brad Stine. This is my podcast, Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Please allow me to introduce my son, my sidekick, and my button pusher par excellence, Wyatt Leroy Stine. Wyatt, how are you doing, and why are you doing it?
Well, currently I am a disembodied voice behind the camera, making sure the buttons work, and nibbling on some quesadilla.
Ooh, little quesadilla nibbling. Yep. You know how they say nibbling in Spanish?
Aerobito smalo?
Close. Chewy uppy little whoa, whoa.
Yeah. I honestly, I just felt like the podcast could use some more prop humor.
Yeah.
So I baked me a prop before the show started.
Well, and in this case, the prop is a cheese. Sorry.
No, it's not. It's a cheese quesadilla.
Yeah,
Okay, get it right. Okay.
Listen, I over the weekend I was traveling throughout Oregon, and I think I picked up some tuberculosis. So I apologize.
Not the best souvenir to bring back.
No, not so good. But it is part of the Oregon experience. It's their little virus. Oregon, as you know, is quite woke, quite challenging of a state, filled with a lot of good people, conservatives, Christians, trapped amongst the crazy. And so I felt like I needed to go give them a little dose of Brad Stine Has Issues on my new tour, Laugh While It's Legal. Wyatt, I feel like I'm a vaccine for the virus of wokeism. What would you think about that? Does that sound like something I should say on the air in case I get sued for malpractice, being as I do not have an official title of a doctor, even though I do believe I am the doctor of truth?
Yeah, I don't think they hand out PhDs for knowing the quote-unquote truth.
They don't?
And last time I checked, they don't.
Have you been checking on that?
More often than you'd think.
Mm-hmm. You know who Nick Kress is, don't you?
Yeah.
You know he's Saint Nick, right?
Yeah.
You know where he is on our little list, don't you?
Number one.
Why do you think that is? Once again, have we ever discovered how that man is able to cut in a line, pushing women and children aside and small puppies? Have you noticed he kicks even puppies if necessary?
He would have been a terrible survivor on the Titanic. Women and children first? Nope, Nick Chris first.
You know, Nick is so innovative, he probably would have carved his own lifeboat out of a table and a deck chair, and probably fashioned his own sails out of a woman's dress.
I would have thought more he would have carved a smaller functional Titanic out of the remains of the sinking one.
Don't think he couldn't, because he is, in fact, St. Nick. You know, Colin Boyd, Benjamin Gregory, they always show up. Paula Marie Rauchi, she's here. She's my favorite four-legged woman. She's in a sideshow now. She's the four-legged lady, which is great because each leg has its own name.
What are they?
Paula Faye Marie Rauchi.
Okay, I was kind of hoping to get you on that one, but no, if that makes sense. Okay, carry on. I'm just going to eat my quesadilla.
Hey, enjoy that quesadilla, because why? This is a special show. Now, I felt like you interrupted me there for a second.
Yeah, I did, because it's not quesadilla, it's a quesadilla.
Oh, so it's Italian.
You have to add a bit of flair when you're naming stuff.
No, I understand
countries.
that. What I find interesting why it is, and let's get a close-up on this.
Okay.
What I find interesting about this, Wyatt, is you say, a quesadilla. Quesadilla clearly is Mexican or of Spanish descent. That's a Spanish word. And you gave it a Italian inflection, which tells me either your geography sucks or your dialect attributes are lacking. Lots of problem.
Unfortunately, I try to do voices, but for some reason that I cannot figure out, every time I try to do a voice, it sounded Italian.
So even if you did an Italian, would that sound Italian?
Oh gosh, I hope not.
Yeah, that'd be too obvious. Too on the nose.
Actually, no. I have tried an Italian accent, and it sounds Swedish.
You know what, Wyatt? You know what people haven't been complaining about the last few weeks?
No, I don't know what you are talking about.
Audio. They can hear us.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I am the button pusher, of course.
I'll say that. You push my buttons regularly. Now, listen, for those who don't know who the disembodied voice is, that's my son, Wyatt Leroy Stine. He issued from my loins. I created him from whole cloth. And now that he's here and exists, and keep in mind, I existed before he was. Do you ever think about that, Wyatt? Because I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but this is a special show. We have a very, very special guest. As you guys know, I told you a while back I wanted to do interviews amongst all the other eclectic people we bring on, but with very specific people that I felt have added to culture in a way that we need to be aware of and honor. And I wanted to do a series called Warrior Pastors. These are pastors, regular old pastors in regular old churches who stood up against the COVID tyranny, who stood up against mandates, who stood fast for their faith in the midst of those who told them they weren't being good Christians. And these were men who really took on even the government. And one, as they tried to find them, they said, yeah, fine, you can find us all you want, but I think you're going to find that we're not going to pay that fine. And they didn't. Why? Because believe it or not, and I don't know if you do, the Constitution still is in America, whether it's being utilized properly or not. Well, I think that's up. The jury's still out. But nevertheless, we're going to have Rick Long as our Warrior Pastor Series number 2. Of course, my pastor, Darren Tyler, was the first. And we do have some others in the can ready to show up soon. But Wyatt, I wanted to tell you that today was a little bit of a special episode because, as you know, we usually spend the first, 5 minutes maybe longer, because, again, we try to be as laborious as possible. And why wouldn't we be? Why wouldn't we be laborious? Or if you were in a prenatal unit, we're going into laboria.
Because we're starved for content and have to desperately fill an hour or so before we get to the interview?
Well,
at least that's my guess.
You didn't have to be so blunt. I was hoping you were going to finesse it just a bit.
Well, that was me finessing it. Unfortunately, as I'm also bad at accents, I happen to also be bad at, just talking in general. Lack of tact, no diction.
Discretion?
That's good. That's a good one, too, yeah. No discretion. Honestly, all I really do back here when we're not filming is make quesadilla and push buttons.
So you made it here in the studio? You got a little hot plate
No. I just took a magnifying glass in the sun. Took me a few hours, but you know.
Nice. Well, you know what they say. Solar power is the energy of the future. We can get rid of all fossil fuels, or that cheap fuel that really has saved more human beings' lives throughout the world than anything in history. And we can just jettison that. Funny I say jettison, because all the people that want us to jettison the fuel are people who are billionaires who fly around in jets, but the rest of us have to suffer. Why? Because they're megalomaniacs. The multi-billionaires and the technocrats on Earth are becoming wicked and demonic. Wyatt, what is it about demons that you always want to bring it up?
You're the only one who's even remotely mentioned it this entire time. What are you talking about?
But weren't you thinking about it?
No.
Wasn't it something that you were contemplating?
The only thing I was contemplating is how many different types of cheeses did I manage to cram into this thing?
Have you ever thought about cheese and what's unique about it? If you chew cheese when it's hot, it burns the top of your mouth, it stretches, it doesn't go willingly. In other words, cheese is one of the few foods that fights back. If you're going to eat me, you're going to pay the consequences. Why? Have you ever burned the roof of your mouth with a hot cheese pizza?
All the time.
So the cheese has done its damage.
Some people think it's the best part.
And those would be masochists?
Yeah, lunatics, I was going to say.
Lunatics.
But if
sociopaths, maybe. You can throw them in.
But if you're really looking for food that fights back, look no further than pineapple.
Why?
Well, pineapples contain an enzyme in them that dissolves proteins, which is a really sciencey way of saying, if you eat a pineapple, it'll slowly dissolve the flesh in your mouth. Not enough to be dangerous, of course, because, you know, we wouldn't eat pineapple if it was, but you know that tingly sensation you feel?
Yeah, I always thought that was my flesh in my mouth slowly melting away.
Well, congratulations, you were correct.
Well, I'll be darned. So pineapple is truly an evil food, but tastes great, especially in cake, especially if it's upside down.
I'm pretty sure the history of the upside down cake was a baker made it right side up. He was going to present it to like someone of nobility.
The king? Yeah.
A king maybe.
Royalty?
And then it dropped like seconds away from the throne room, and he's just like panicking. No, so it was always supposed to be like that. And then then the king tried it, and it's like, this is good. But then he threw it in the dungeon anyway because he had pineapple in it.
See, I always thought pineapple upside down cake was just normal cake that was baked in Australia and got shipped quickly to the United States, where clearly it came upside down.
You know, I never understood why Australia is always considered the upside down place, no matter where geographically you are in the world. Like, even if you're like relatively close to Australia, like name some countries that are close to Australia geographically.
Guam?
Guam. People in Guam probably still think Australia is upside down, despite basically being within a stone's toss away from them.
New Zealand?
Yeah, exactly. So, at what point is your country close enough to Australia, but far away enough from Australia that you're just sort of sideways?
Why do they have this unique moniker? What is it about Australia that allows us to sort of assume that they are the upside down continent? I can tell you why.
What?
They're the only continent in the world who regularly boxes kangaroos. I think that should tell you all about those people's psyche.
Well, what I was actually getting at is, if Australia is the upside down place, and everywhere else is right side up, doesn't that mean that there's a middle ground where everything is sideways?
Yeah.
Well, where is it then?
What has gone sideways? I think the entire Earth has gone sideways, if you haven't noticed in the last couple of years.
Okay, no, you are grossly not figuring out what I'm saying here. Australia, country, known, everything upside down.
Yes.
Every other part of the world, known, right side up. What is in between right side up and upside down?
Sideways.
Sideways. If there were countries that are upside down and there were countries that are right side up, in the middle there has to be a country that's sideways. I have asked you 3 times to tell me what that country is, and you failed me in all 3 of them.
Ecuador.
Well played.
Now, listen, I need to ask you a question because, normally, son, as you know, and as you so aptly pointed out to our viewers and listeners, we try to kill as much time as possible because our content is so obsequious. But I do want to ask you if you have noticed that I didn't spend a lot of time today on this episode, Monday night, God's comic, Brad Stine, and Brad Stine Has Issues, with his son, Wyatt Stine. Have you noticed that I didn't spend a lot of time and don't have in front of me my iPad by which I can talk about and get the comments from our viewers and listeners? If you notice, that's not here today.
Yeah, I noticed that, and I'm pretty sure it's because you're making up that time by spending about a minute trying to name this podcast that you did a few seconds ago. What was that?
What do you mean?
You were like, Brad Stine has issues with his son, Wyatt Stine, from Brad Stine. Like, how many buzzwords do you need to include in the show? It's a show about us failing miserably to have a podcast. It's not that complicated.
I feel like coherence is the death knell of a podcast. At least mine. My concept, as you know, is try to sort of start off slow and then just trickle out.
So it's like we try to go uphill, but then when we reach the top, we realize it was really more of like a bump.
Yeah, it's sort of a Sisyphus.
Yeah, so
podcast.
like at no point do we ever actually reach a peak.
Right.
It's all level ground.
Right. What are you saying? Everybody goes for peaks. I said, let's change up the dynamic. See, you don't appreciate your dad. You know I'm a genius, right?
Starting to think that a bit less, but yeah, keep going.
Okay, well, anyways, I'm just saying I'm always on the cutting edge of trying to do things that nobody else expects you to do, especially things that would make people want to tune in regularly. But
are you sure about that? Because I'm pretty sure people would expect you to make a good podcast, and you are definitely proving that one wrong.
Wyatt, I'm trying. Listen. I admit that I didn't know that I was going to ever do a podcast. It was. I kind of fell into it. I believe God called me to the podcastery, and so here I sit. I didn't want to be this. I knew you needed a job, or at least you needed some dignity. So because you work at Lowe's, and so I thought, well, this is the least of your problems. Is the least you can say I'm part of a podcast. Now, albeit a train wreck of a podcast, but nevertheless, you're part of it. You could be the engineer on the train wreck. You could be the caboose, so you're the last one to be crushed.
I could be the air pilot on the Hindenburg.
Hey, yeah.
It's still a job.
Remember, the Germans created the Hindenburg. They're some of the best mechanical engineers and engineers in human history. And one then wonders why they thought, if we're going to have a gigantic dirigible that is going to take people around the world, and they're going to float, let's make sure that we use gas that is so highly flammable that they don't have a shot if it gets struck by lightning. What do you think made them make that call, son?
I'm pretty sure isn't hydrogen cheap, like 4 times cheaper than helium to get?
Oh, so the Hindenburg disaster was simply because Germans are penny pinchers. That's
I also know that hydrogen is about 4 times cheaper than not cheaper, lighter than helium.
Okay.
So you can lift up with a lot less stuff.
Okay.
And probably that has to do with probably just, there's only so much space in the blimp.
I get you. Well, listen, if that's their calls, like, we're going to lose some folks every now and again, but at least we save some money.
Plus, remember, this was before we had a good idea of how static electricity works.
Right. Well, listen, speaking of static electricity, and we are, because you just brought it up, I wanted to talk about the electricity that seems to be coming in America right now, and that is the electricity of conflict. Wyatt, we are at a conflict that is, I think, in some ways unprecedented because we don't seem to find anything in common. And I thought today, before we get to our guest, and you're going to find him fascinating, he really went through some interesting things to defend faith and his church, and you're going to enjoy him. And if you're in the Colorado area, Arvada, you might want to go visit the church. It's amazing. But why I thought to myself, what I wanted to try today, or as we like to call it, Monnight, because it is Monday night, I wanted to spend just a few moments before we get to our guest doing something that you weren't expecting, and that is I wanted to do a bit of a inquiry, and an interview, if you will, off the cuff, with you.
I'm sorry, come again?
Yeah, so here's what I was thinking.
Uh-huh.
We sit here, we have left versus right in America. There's a clash, and there doesn't seem to be any solutions. We have Democrat versus Republican. We have theist versus atheist. We have left versus right. We have me versus the world. So we're sitting here with a lot of issues at play, which is why I called it Brad Stine Has Issues, because I got plenty. But I thought to myself, well, one of the reasons that we have these issues is because we don't know each other. We don't understand each other, and we don't even want to take time to get to know each other. So I thought I'd spend just a couple minutes looking at you as someone who represents the 26-year-old American. Mm-hmm. Because that would be your bailiwick, right? And so let's let you be the expert, let you be the representative of 26-year-olds, and just get a feel for what, maybe by the end of this small, quick micro interview, we'll get a better idea of why we are so at odds with each other. I'm older than you, I'm a baby boomer. And thus, I've been around a lot longer. I've seen a lot more. I've seen the best and the worst of things. And you're just sort of halfway to where I already am. So, Wyatt, let me just ask you a couple of questions. It's off the cuff. This wasn't planned. You didn't know this was going to happen, and that's what I like. My hope is you have fear, anxiety, and depression, and then immediately overcome it on the fly while answering some in-depth questions, plus eating a quesadilla.
Actually, I finished the quesadilla.
Okay, well, then that's even better, because now we'll be able to understand you when you answer. Wyatt, when you think of America, what do you think? What is America to you at 26?
That's a good question, actually.
That's the only kind of questions I use. A lot of guys use dumb questions, stupid questions, idiotic questions. I said, I'm going to use good ones. I'm sorry, it's just the call I made.
The best way that I can describe, at least how I view America right now, is 50 people all huddled in a trench coat trying to act like a unified being.
Okay. That is a very odd metaphor. 50 people huddle in a trench coat.
Those are the only metaphors I have.
Okay. Well, so so that's sort of a humorous perspective, but I'm just talking about like as a American citizen who works in America in Lowe's, who's on a podcast, who goes to school, who's been to college, been to of course school, regular academics, is sort of navigating life. I hear a lot of kids your age seem to have gotten this idea that the American dream isn't for them. There seems to be this idea that, well, I can never own a home, I can't afford my own, I don't even know, domicile, the jobs are difficult to come by. Now, do you feel amongst your peers that kind of is the vibe, or are you guys still believe, no, we can become anything we want?
Absolutely, it is much harder to get by in this world. When you were growing up, when you got like your first house, how much did you have to work to afford it?
How much did I have to work?
Yeah, like how much money did you have to have on hand before you could get a mortgage, get a house?
Well, you just needed a good credit rating, and then you needed to prove, that you could afford it. I don't know that I had tons of money. I borrowed a down payment from my dad, so that helped. And I had a realtor that sort of at that time, this is in California, by the way, not an easy place to get real estate, but way back in the 90s, right? So she wrote a note to the lender and said, I know this guy, you can trust him. So I try to sort of use every part of my facility and my strategy to get them to approve my loan, and they did. But I didn't have thousands of dollars in the bank. I couldn't even remember how much I had, and I promise you it wasn't much. If it was 10 grand, I'd be shocked. But so I'm wondering how much is true that you guys are in a more challenging place, and how much is it just sort of you were never taught to believe in the American dream, believe that you could overcome anything, but instead are taught you're kind of a victim. I feel like there's victimhood mentality amongst your peers. Now,
okay, all right, how about this? So, minimum wage right now is what in Tennessee?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know either, but I know a lot of places are hiring base $15 an hour.
Okay.
How much was minimum wage back when you were about my age? If, just guess. I don't need an exact number.
$4 an hour.
$4 an hour. Okay.
That's my guess.
Let's
Wasn't much.
see.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like what? 70s? 80s?
When I bought my house, is that what
No,
we're
no,
referencing?
no.
When I was a young kid in the 70s.
No. Yeah. Sure, why not?
Well, that would have been $2.50 an hour or something, probably.
All right. 1970s.
And listen, make this a long, drawn-out, dead air response,
yeah,
because it
listen.
is audio and visual, and the last thing we want people to do is to be intrigued by this. We want them to get confused and upset and just slam their... We're trying to get as many people to slam their phones.
I'm trying to make a point here. I have a calculator in my hand right now, okay? So, minimum wage of about $2.50 an hour in 1970 is the equivalent of $30.49 an hour.
Okay.
And you wonder why it's harder for us to have and buy things.
Why?
When, okay, you know what? Twice minimum wage right now is basically the same as what
You took for granted as the bare minimum to get by.
Do you have any idea how many places right now are hiring for $30 an hour without a college degree?
Hey, you don't even need a high school degree
To get minimum wage back when you were a kid, right? You could just apply to a place and go, hey, hire me.
Yeah. So you're telling me, and in this, I mean, we've never discussed this. This is all off the cuff. You are telling me that Lowe's doesn't pay you $30 an hour?
No, of course not.
So 28?
No, 15.
Half.
Yeah.
Half.
Yeah, and that's considered minimum wage.
Then why don't you guys innovate? Instead of buying a house,
Okay.
buy a roof. Start there, and slowly but surely buy some walls and live it up. Because as we talked about in a podcast earlier, a house, like a cave, is simply a hole with a house around it. Cave is simply a hole with a mountain around it. A house is a hole with wood around it. Why don't you get a mini house? Why don't you get one of those micro homes? Why don't you live in a tent? Why don't you quit complaining and figure it out?
Let me because of this.
because you could afford, with not even a high school diploma, the kind of things we can't afford with college degrees.
Do you think anybody can buy a home even when I was a kid with minimum wage?
Yeah, yeah.
No.
Yeah,
No.
you can definitely do that.
How in the world am I going to get a loan for, at that time, let's say, $180,000 condo in Southern California for $2?
Who in the right mind is paying $100,000 for a condo in 1970?
No, well, this was in the 90s. But anyways,
Right,
so we're all over the map. But I guess what I'm trying to get at is, so when you think of America, are you proud of it? Are you patriotic? Do you feel like this is a country that you believe in and believe has done more good for more people in human history than any other nation? Yes or no?
It's hard to answer because I only really know American history.
Okay.
But yeah, I would say that we've definitely, for longer than we have not, tried to do the best.
Okay. And so as your age group grows, they're saying, hey, it's hard. We don't seem to be making enough money. Somehow you guys want some kind of crazy amount of money for as a minimum wage. And as you pushed for that and fought for that and picketed for that, we finally said, all right, we'll bump it up. And immediately the companies then went right to innovation by bringing in robots and electronics where you could order your own food, and you lost all your gigs because minimum wage wasn't designed for you to live off of. It was designed to teach you how to work, a work ethic, to go to work, be there on time, do your job, not get paid tons, not complain, not worry about, yep, you don't maybe get insurance. This is something you're working towards. It gave you a chance for some dignity, to teach yourself how to move forward, and if nothing else, to say, this sucks, I don't want this, I want more. It was an inspiration to go get that degree, or to go figure out an entrepreneurship and build your own business, or at minimum find a job that you think you could like, you could be good at, and would pay well. It was simply a starter to start you learning how to make money, save it, and be grateful for it. So what part of that have your generation missed, my son of my loins?
Hold on, I'm doing some more off-the-cuff research, because again, we don't have time for this, but I'm pretty sure minimum wage was designed to be a living wage.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
No, it wasn't. It was for 15-year-olds at McDonald's who could make a Egg McMuffin. No, it's not a living wage. It was additional money. They assumed you were, if you're 15, you're still living at home. You're still in school. Clearly, you can't have a 40-hour a day, 40-hour a week job. No, it's not a living wage. Nobody can live off of minimum wage. It's called minimum wage because it's the minimum amount. It's better than nothing. It's teaching you something. See, this is what I'm saying, and this is why I appreciate this conversation. You didn't know it was coming. It was off the cuff. I was just curious, and I know you. You're my son. Mm-hmm. You're a good man. You're a noble man. You're a moral man. You're kind. You're not really a victim. You don't go around complaining. You do jobs when we ask you to. So you're a good representative of your age group as far as you aren't, you're not burning buildings and looting. You're trying to live your life with honor. And yet, you see this country and just a basic. And all we talked about was minimum wage. We didn't get into anything else. Just you somehow have gotten this idea that you're owed more than you deserve.
No. What I believe is that it is much harder to make enough money to live now than it was back then, and that trend is only going to get worse.
Mm-hmm. Would you rather have a socialist country where they give you whatever you want and take 70% of your taxes, but at least you'll have your free medical care? It would be sucky, and they'll weed you out if they don't think it's cost effective, and they'll euthanize you when you get to a certain age. And heck, you won't have the dignity of being able to build a business because you're not going to want to, because they're not going to reward you. They're going to steal from you. Oh, you're making money, we're going to take that and give it to this other guy who doesn't do jack. You'd rather have that. You'd rather give up liberties, freedoms. You'd rather live like sort of a well-paid slave. That's what your people, your generation thinks is a good means of living their life, because if that's what they're teaching you guys in school, and where else would you have picked up this crap? America's doomed.
Let me tell you something. The only people who genuinely want socialism and communist ideas are the people who lay in bed all day, don't have a job, and just want everything given to them.
Yeah.
And this can be proven. They've done studies on this stuff.
Okay, well.
The people who are the laziest somehow happen to be the ones who coincidentally also want the most done for them.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't put yourself in that category.
I have a job. I try my hardest to make enough to get by. It's not easy, but I do it.
But doesn't it motivate you to want to work harder or find other options? Doesn't it force you to have to say, this isn't going to pan out, I need to figure something else out? Let me give you an example. When I was performing, when I first started out in this business as a performance artist, I was 18, 19 years old. I was a professional close-up magician, did sleight-of-hand magic in restaurants. I think I made... This is the 80s, 1980. It was so young, old, years back. I get it. I think I might have made $50 a day, maybe 75 if I was really rich. And so I would try to get 4, 5, 6 restaurants the week. One on a Wednesday night, I'm at this one Thursday. I went out. I pitched this idea to these restaurants. I got the gigs. I was working regularly, and I was bringing in money. And I looked at what I was doing. I said, I love what I do. I'm a performance artist. I'm making a living doing this magic. I'm making this money, but it's not enough. I didn't complain and didn't stay there. I said, I got to figure this out. So what I decided was, what if I had a stand-up show, a larger show that I could do comedy magic. I can do magic. I do it in a funny way. I'll do it on stage where I can get more money, and then I can go into comedy clubs, because I realized comedy clubs were all over the nation at that time. That would give me another revenue stream. It would give me another thing I could sell with my wares, with my skill set, with my desires, and I would make more money. So my difficulty didn't cause me to complain or just become lethargic. It forced me to say, how can I take this to the next level? It did what it was supposed to do. It motivated me to get better and to overcome this problem. And that's what I think has happened to your generation, that they see difficulty and inconvenience as something to despise instead of something that is going to drive them to greatness. And that is a sad and horrible testimony to what has happened to America. American ingenuity, American dream, American prosperity, and the expectation the government doesn't owe you anything, because every stinking thing the federal government's involved with, they destroy. They're all corrupt. They're all about making power and money for them, and they're destroying this nation. And what you just taught me, son, in this very simple way, is why it's happening. Because you haven't seen that difficulties were designed to make you become great. You know, I am grateful to be on this podcast. Never expected it to take place. But I feel like maybe, just maybe, I'm helping people. I told you guys that very, very soon, the Militia of the Mind will launch. And the Mighty 10,000 will be available. If you go to bradstine.com, that's where it's going to be. We will build an army, a militia, just like the Second Amendment gave us. But it's going to be of the mind. Obviously, the absolute last resort is taking up arms. And that only happens when you have no options and you literally are being threatened and destroyed. But I think, what if we outthink them? What if we outlive them? What if we outmaneuver them? What if we out-intrigue them? What if we out-artistically, sophisticatedly overcome this Marxist hell that is inculcated into our academia, that my son just proved, even though he didn't realize it, and within even now corporations who no longer simply want to sell to everybody, but bow to the equity and inclusion and diversity cancer that's killing us. That's why I said with the Budweiser thing, they cannot be given permission to make a mea culpa. They need to be buried in bankrupt. We need to show the power of our numbers. And that's what has to happen. You didn't do it with the NFL. You went right back to them after they crapped on our flag. You went right back to the NBA. You didn't want to discipline yourself, and you certainly didn't want to do without. And that type of an American is no longer an American. You're simply a citizen. You're leeching the best of us, and you're leaving us with nothing behind, a decayed dead bones. Those of us who are Americans who want to sign up to be the Mighty 10,000 and the Militia of the Mind, we're going to fight back, and let's see if we have a chance. We may not, but we go down with honor. That's one thing I can't say for the left. You have no honor, and you will face bringing to him the hell that you brought to people on this earth. And what a horror. Bad enough you're going to hell, but you go to hell as a coward. Oh, well, here we sit. I know people who aren't cowards, people who are going to join, people who are going to fight, and there's going to have to be warrior pastors from the pulpit inspiring their people to move on. And I just happen to have one on with me tonight. His name is Rick Long. He is an amazing pastor in Arvada, Colorado. And he is somebody that I've worked with and have performed at this church numerous times. But I want you to hear the story of what he did during the COVID shutdown, do the mandates as they came after him and attacked him. I want you to see what it looked like for him and what he did and how he fought back to inspire you, and see what pastors should be able to do around this nation, and Christian citizens, patriotic citizens, conservative citizens, or atheist citizens who believe liberty is worth whatever is asked of it. So that's why I'm bringing him on. You're going to enjoy this. Hang on. And then afterwards I'll come back with a wrap-up. But please enjoy and soberly take in what he's going to teach you so you can bring it to the marketplace of the area of your influence. So please welcome Pastor Rick Long in my series, Warrior Pastors. Hey, folks. Well, as you know, on Stine Has Issues, all I ever wanted to do from the very, very get-go was to stand for truth, for liberty, for freedom, for reality, religious liberties, First Amendment rights, all of these things that were constantly under attack during the cult of Corona. And all that it didn't show us something new that had happened or infiltrated America. It just exposed the battle that we have been having in this country, honestly, probably since the 60s, when they really started to decide that we are going to slowly but surely destroy the West and destroy America through the academia, and that will infiltrate into every other segment of society. And that's where we're at. That's where we're at. All Corona did was expose the cowards. All Corona did was expose the fearful. And most importantly, it exposed those who don't give a crap about liberty. They don't care. They don't care if this country dies. They think there's something beautiful about destroying the greatest nation in human history, the freest nation, and the only nation that gives anybody a shot at bettering their life freely and with their own conscience be defended. So that's what I wanted to explore. And I realized, as I've been in all 50 states and all around the world, but mainly in this country, because that's my territory I was given, that there were some pastors. There was a handful of pastors, thank you, Jesus, that stood strong and said, nope, something isn't right. This is not what it means to be a Christ follower. This is not what it means to be a leader. And as a pastor, you have an obligation to kind of be at the forefront, the tip of the spear of showing your congregants what it's going to look like to forge ahead during difficulty and during oppression and during attacks. And this is church history for 2,000 years. So it's come to our shores, and here we sit. Episode 1 was with my pastor, Darren Tyler, who opened in 2020. And that, to me, is the real ultimate crown, that you did it when it was at the worst case scenario, when everybody thought you were killing grandma just for opening your doors. So I happen to know this next pastor quite well. I've known him for quite a few years. He's been gracious enough to open up his pulpit to me to perform on numerous occasions. And of course, at all times, it was under jeopardy that I would destroy his ministry in one fell swoop. But somehow he survived. And but he was also a warrior pastor. And I was able to speak to him personally in the midst of the nonsense. And I wanted to bring him on and let you see what it looks like and how to encourage you, inspire you, but also what is it going to look like moving forward. He's in a very challenging area, challenging state, Colorado, which used to be a good old Western, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps kind of, hey, we are fighting the good fight and we believe in personal liberties. Nah, not now. But he stood strong, and he's still here, and God bless him for that. And things are even blowing up for his church, which I think is proof that God honors those who honor him. So we're going to bring him on, and you're going to get to know him. And if you're in Colorado, you're going to start going to his church because you need to be part of this experience. So please welcome my friend, Pastor Rick Long. How are you, my friend?
Brother. Hello.
How are you, brother?
Man, I'm good. I'm always good when I'm with you. I feed off your energy and your passion, and you know that. I think from the day we met 20-some years ago, I knew you were a comic of not just great comedic timing, but of truth and the issues of the day. And that's why we love having you here, and I love having you as a friend. So thanks for having me on.
Well, it's my pleasure. And trust me, you wouldn't be on if you didn't have the goods. And that's really where I'm at right now. And that's and it has nothing to do with me or that I have some sort of insight into, who I get to anoint as the pastor that's on my side. It's pretty self-evident now in the United States, that we are at war. We're in civil war. Now, it's, thank God, not hasn't reached the point of arms and bloodshed, at least in what would be considered the typical civil war. I mean, there has been bloodshed, actually, through Antifa and other sort of forms of the sort of leftist arm and thuggery in this United States. But so far, we haven't had this sort of, get the Union and the Confederacy together and fight it to keep the Union together. And I hopefully that's never going to happen. I created this concept within my podcast called the militia of the mind, where we're going to try to outthink these people. We're going to try to out-believe these people and try, if we can, to utilize the First Amendment and our freedoms, and hopefully enough folks out there who love liberty to defend this nation in the midst of this crisis. So let's start right there. First off, you're a pastor. Let's get a quick bio. How long you been a pastor? What called you to it? And what does it mean to you to be a pastor? What does that responsibility entail?
It's interesting because I've been a pastor now going on my 38th year since I was ordained in 1985. My good friend, one of my best friends, Greg Steer, we were both just junior high students in a small Christian school in town. My dad had stuck me in that school in hopes that I would get a good foundation, since at that point he was diagnosed with histoplasmosis and given a year to live. Since then, God healed him, and he became an ordained pastor in my church. But
nice.
That's another story. And so we were in this small Christian school that was literally raising up preacher boys. So the first sermon I ever preached was 1980 to adults as a basically 15, 16-year-old kid. And that was an extraordinary experience. It was scary. I remember just dissecting three of my favorite verses, Philippians 3:13 and 14, and a little bit of 15. And so I knew then that God had called me, not necessarily to stand in front of people, but to tell people everywhere about the clear gospel message that God saves us by his grace through faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. Nothing that we do, nothing that we've done, nothing that we can ever do to keep it, maintain it. It is by his grace through faith. And that became my deepest passion. And so right out of high school, I went into college at Colorado Bible College, and eventually would be ordained in that ministry and be a youth pastor and a worship pastor. And that continued until I launched this church in 1989 with Greg and with my wife. And God just has taken us like a couple twigs in the Colorado River on an unbelievable journey. Our ministry, and I know when pastors talk about numbers, sometimes it sounds like a bragamony. Everything that's been done here in this ministry is literally, to God be the glory. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 22 and a half years old. I had no street cred. I had nothing, and just stepped out in faith. And since then, we just baptized the last October, our 10,000th person in our church has been baptized. We've seen over 50,000 come to Christ in our adult services. We have 57 local and global ministries. We have 58 churches in the Amazon jungle of Peru among the Shawi people. And that means we also have 58 staff in Peru, 50 here. And God has opened an unbelievable door. And if we get time to talk about it, I'll share more. He dropped in front of us a facility that has a current Christian high school that was going to be closed, and the building sold off. And we just happened to be in the middle of a building campaign to build a center of hope here for teenagers, for the hurting and the broken and the homeless. And God just totally redirected our focus and said, you're not going to build it here. It's 4 miles away, and you're going to open a brand new Christian school. And like you, Brad, I can't think of a more pivotal time in history to keep private Christian education going. So I've literally put my entire ministry at risk and said, God, all the chips are in. Please provide. And he's doing miracles, but it's scary and exciting at the same time.
So first off, you didn't even mention the name of your church. I know that you're humble, and I know that you allowed God to do all the work, and that's kind of a given. We always presume that if we're Christ followers, we give him the credit. But it's probably okay to mention your church.
Yes, we're Grace Church here in Arvada, Colorado, and that's our ministry.
Well, and Arvada has an interesting backstory when we look at culture. Greg Steer, like you said, your good friend and my friend has got Dare to Share, which is a ministry to teach teenagers how to not only know Christ, but to share him and to be fearless and to make their life committed to this idea that God has been on earth for real. It's not a myth, and that you need to know about this because it's the single most important story in human history. But his, if I remember, ministry, or at least perhaps the trajectory of where he wanted to focus his ministry, was directly a result of Columbine.
Yeah.
And so can you maybe give us a little backstory about that? Because clearly one of the most tragic, eye-opening events in our history, and maybe the launch, horrifically, of this theme of kids shooting other kids in school, or at least it was one of the most popular. I'm sure it happened before that. So can you tell us a little bit about how that played out in your community?
Absolutely. So when Greg and I were in 8th grade, he was in 9th, we planned Grace Church. We literally planned it. We drew charts that summer. We said, we're going to start a church. And then Greg at that time, being probably the most dynamic one-on-one evangelist you'll ever meet, and pretty dynamic in a crowd, has always been passionate about the lost. I mean, when I came to the Christian school, he took me under his wing. He's a year older, and he just took me under his wing and began to really impart that passion to me. So we also planned that one day we would start reaching the world. You have big aspirations as a kid. So we start Grace. I start a Christian band with my wife that we traveled and did concerts. And then a year later, we started Dare to Share. First, we called it Warriors for Christ, but it sounded like a terrorist organization, so we changed it. And Greg and I used to travel around, just the two of us, and do conferences initially. And that was going very well. I mean, we were doing that, doing the church, we were busier than I'll get out. And then actually the first shooting that we knew of, I think, was there in Paducah, Tennessee, or somewhere there. And we just went, man, our schools are under attack. And Greg was, he was still working here at Grace. He was just, he would come in and preach on about 50, 60% of the time at that point. I was the only full-time pastor, and we were bringing staff on. And then about 97, we knew that God was starting to move me 100% here and him to Dare to Share. And we had sort of kind of put a little timetable together. And then, of course, we all know April 20th, 1999, literally the shooting was still in progress. Greg and I rushed down to Clement Park. Columbine students had gathered. Rachel Scott's car was right there. She was the one that was the first victim who said, I believe in Jesus, and Clee Bolton Harris shot her. And that had already become a memorial. And so as the media vans were lining up, Greg and I began loving on, counseling, and sharing the gospel with teenagers. And after 2.5 days of doing that, literally just going home to eat and going back down there, Greg said, I got to go, man. I got to go train teenagers. And I said, Greg, you got to do that. I got to do this, because we need a church that is, unashamed and reaching the lost where they're at. And so God exploded both ministries when that happened, because I think in some respects we were double-minded men, a little unstable in our ways, and man, we went full tilt. And my wife continued to be the producer of the conferences for the next 2 years. She had been that from the beginning, and then we multiplied and went our separate ways. So to speak. Still very committed. I was just talking to him, texting with him yesterday. But God is doing remarkable stuff. And it was a result, Brad, of looking at what you just said. It's been since the 60s that there has been, not just since the 60s, but there was an intentionality in the educational institutions to say, no more God, no more evangelical Christianity. We're going to rid the educational system of God. Now, thank God that there have still been Christian administrators and Christian teachers. Otherwise, they would have immediately turned into the bastions of leftist agenda populists that we see today. And they didn't. It was slowly, progressively getting worse and worse. But what we've seen, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is in the last 5 years, and actually the COVID nightmare has literally accomplished the agenda they set out to accomplish that may have taken another 10 years, 12 years. It literally helped accomplish it overnight. And I wish people, Christians, would lay aside Democrats, Republicans, and all that stuff, and just look at Scripture, look at the facts. I mean, this is prophesied. These are the days that we're looking at ahead of us. We don't know when Jesus is coming. We don't know that. We're not supposed to spend our time worrying about it, but we do need to evaluate, why is this current condition in our country, the one country that has stood for Jesus Christ, Judeo-Christian ethics, why are we seeing this mass, as we've heard, the reset, the Great Reset, happening so quickly? And they did it through fear. They did it through control. And they is not, or are not, the historical Democrats or historical independents or historical Republicans. It is a different group that are leftist, globalists, who want to trash this country so that the whole world can come together with one common enemy, Judeo-Christianity.
Yes. Well, and there you have it. I think one huge mistake that Christians make in America, I always sort of differentiate American Christians from everybody else, because American Christianity has had a bittersweet, double-edged sword relationship with Christ, because Jesus, said that those who should most fear coming into heaven or to getting there were the rich.
Yeah.
And his disciples were befuddled because at that point, I think there was this sort of sense that if you're blessed with riches or food and clothing and substance, that God must think well of you.
Yeah.
And if you are poor, then clearly it's a sin. You've done something to create this. Of course, India had that with their class system, and they reincarnated, and you deserve to be untouchable because you did some evil. And of course, we don't believe in reincarnation, but and Jews don't either. But they had this sense, I guess, that there was a punishment maybe for those who weren't serving God. And Jesus kind of turned that on his head. He said, the rich are the ones that are going to be in most jeopardy of not getting into my home. And they were like, I don't understand. Well, then who can get in?
Yeah.
Because if the people that are blessed can't get in, then what the heck shot do we have?
Right.
And I think that what I have observed, and I would definitely want to get your take, because as a pastor, you have a very unique vantage point, because you've had personal encounters with so many people who are struggling usually.
Yeah.
Right? You're dealing with people, if they're coming in for counseling, that are struggling. Something is off balance in their life. The problem with being rich is you assume you're doing things right, that things are good. I always say being born in the United States is like being born to a rich family. You don't know how else to see things. I guess everybody has a pool, everybody has caviar in their fridge. Yeah. Everybody gets to take vacations. That's how the world works. And it is not only is it not how the world works, it's by far how the least amount of the world works. Most
That's right.
Humans are in poverty.
That's right.
So I think God has always hesitated to bless people. He wants to, but he knows the temptation, the laziness, the potential apathy that one spirit can garner when they're given blessings.
Yep.
So when United States was founded, when the founders decided that we're going to break away from England, that we've created this colony, we've done this on our own, we've created our own government, we've created our own autonomy, we created our system of being able to govern ourselves and create our own infrastructure and so forth. And suddenly Britain decided, no, we're going to control you. Said, no, we've been doing this a long time. We're going to do it ourselves. And they decided to break free and create a nation they couldn't have imagined.
That's right.
What this was going to become. They couldn't have imagined. But here's what we do know. This nation was founded based on the original Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact.
That's right.
Jesus Christ is going to be at the center of this thing. If you want in, this is what we're going to ask of you. So this idea of virtue that the founders all knew would be imperative if this nation was going to survive, because we're self-governing. We're a republic. So you have to be moral people, because we're not going to be China and force you to be moral by the gun, right?
Yeah.
So tell me your take as a pastor and what you've observed as to the incredible danger of American Christianity and how it's being played out, as opposed to the other Christianity. For example, you said you have South American church and so forth. Totally different culture, totally different navigation of how the world works. You know, what do you see as the problems that American Christians face simply because we've been given so much?
You hit it on the head. So much in there to unpack. I would start with this. You know, if you're sitting there watching or listening to this podcast and you're thinking, well, I'm not rich. I mean, I don't have a lot. We need to understand this, that as Americans, if you have any kind of roof over your head, if you have $10 to your name, and if you have food for 3 days, you are wealthier than 7,800,000,000 people. And that 96% of the world lives on less than $30 a month, and most of them don't know where their next meal is coming from. 3 billion of them face persecution or even execution if they name Jesus as their Savior, or if they're caught with the Bible, mostly in Muslim countries, but in Hindu and in other countries as well. And so we are wealthy beyond all measure. And it just so happens that I'm in a series right now called Leaving a Legacy of Love. And one week I'm preaching on vision, and then the next week I'm preaching on finances and generosity. Well, my theme verse is Matthew 6:22 through 24. And I love the way the TPT puts it. It says, the eyes of the Spirit allow revelation light to enter into your being. If your heart is unclouded, the light floods in. But if your eyes are focused on money, the light cannot penetrate and darkness takes its place. How profound will be the darkness within you if the light of truth cannot enter? And then he tells us, you can't worship God and money. It's the only material thing in Scripture that the Bible says You cannot love God and love money. Now, we're told in many different places, you shouldn't do this. It's not right to do that. But you can still love God and struggle with your temper. You can still love God and struggle with lust. You can still love God and struggle. But if you love money, or if money is your primary focus, your heart is unclouded. And that's why those who are lost, that are wealthy, are the hardest people to bring to Christ, because they're self-dependent. Their achievements have created a force around them that just says, I don't need anybody, and I sure don't need someone dying for my sins. But as we have all watched, and I know you have, you see a person that is independently wealthy, or someone that has everything they think they need, and when they get sick, and I've stood by 700 deathbeds in 38 years, and every one of us who is desperately in need of God, because there is a God-sized hole in their heart, and that void is creating an opportunity for Christians to say, that's Jesus, and he's the only one that can fill that void. And I think going back to, I'm a history major, and you go back to what happened with the Mayflower Compact, the Magna Carta of this country, the very essence of who we are, and it's under attack today. It's under attack, and this attack that the radical media, and frankly even some of the conservative media, continues to sling at this country, is that, well, yeah, these people were racist, and this country really didn't start in 1776. It started in 1619. And what's so wrong about all of it is, number one, we're rewriting history. We're going back and we're projecting problems into the very essence of world history that doesn't exist. I mean, at this time in history, more African Americans are still enslaved in Africans are still enslaved in African countries than they have been in the last 100 years. I mean, there's more slavery going on around the world. Now, does that justify our history? No, it doesn't. Does it justify that most everyone who was living 200 years ago had a slave? It doesn't justify it. But I think it's an explanation we have to look at. And I think that all of this is the attack, again, of those who think, I don't need God because I have wealth, the tech companies, the career politicians, the independently wealthy. And it really is amazing when you think about it. There's only 2,000 billionaires in this country, and 75% of them live in South Florida. And they, along with the tech companies, control everything, along with the media. They really have that kind of power. But what we see, and what I love in what we see, is that when Christians are willing to just step up and lovingly say, listen, I may not agree with you politically, but let me talk to you personally on a spiritual level. And we're able to say, I don't care if you're a Democrat, a Republican, independent, a leftist, I don't care what you are. I care that God loves you, and you were born depraved just like me. And the only hope is Jesus. We are bankrupt. We are bankrupt. And when you can help someone who is wealthy understand they are spiritually bankrupt. And that's why when I preach about generosity, I always say this. We can't outgive God because he's the greatest giver in history. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. So I think it all ties back into that very verse I read, that you cannot serve both God and money. You either love one and hate the other, or hate one and love the other. And, the most happy people I've ever known who have internal joy are the wealthy who discover that wealth is God's and become a generous reservoir of change. That's really what I've seen.
Yeah, and you've known me for a long time, and I've been at your church performing a few times, and I know you like my comedy and my style and whatever. And, one of the things that I learned, the beautiful thing about Christianity, there's lots, but, one of the things that I appreciate about Christianity is how much it allows us to be failures and real and authentic. People will often say to me on a line, right, because I'm conservative and a Christian, and I admit it, and it's part of my comedy. Of course, so they hate me and they slam me, but oftentimes they'll use this term, oh, well, that's not very Christian of you, or they'll use the virtues of my faith to sort of try to attack me because I'm not living up to a virtue, by the way, that they despise. Yeah. So I don't even know why they're using that. What does Christianity have to do? You don't believe in it anyway, so you're going to try to set me to a standard that you don't think deserves to exist. So forget that hypocrisy. But one of the things that I say to these folks is said, you Christians are some of the most judgmental people you've ever met. Oh, they're some of the most hateful people. Oh, they're some of the most evil people. Blah, 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 blah. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Me too.
As a matter of fact, it's one of the proofs that Christianity is true.
That's right.
Because number one, Christianity admits all those things. We're evil. We're broken. We're intrinsically sinful. Two, I'm not being a hypocrite when I'm acting that way as a Christian. I'm being consistent. That's the human condition. And three, everything you said about me is true. And guess what? God loves me and has forgiven me, not because I'm a jerk, because I am. Because he sees me through a filter of blood.
That's right.
That is his son's. It is the craziest story. It's either the most ridiculous story that God Almighty,
that's right,
who could have easily said, you know what, you screwed up, wipe them out, get a new batch, let's start over till I get a good group. He didn't. His love was committed to his original creation. He said, I'm never abandoning you, ever. Matter of fact, I'll become you. I'll become the worst of you and accept it all so that I can always see you pure the way I need to, but I can't do it unless I can righteously judge sin. So there's nothing like this, brother. It's
Amen.
The craziest story there ever was, and it's the most beautiful story. But one of the things that I do say when I'm on stage, and the reason I kind of brought up that backstory is another thing that Christianity says that I love is it says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. In other words, you accept Jesus, good for you. Right. You just started.
Yep.
You got a long journey to go, and you're going to have to start learning to judge people where they're going, not where they are, because we're going to be in different places along the road. And some of us are just going to suck at certain parts of this and never get there until we're dead. We're just not going to get certain things. That's just the way it is. That's where I need you to come alongside and lift me up when I'm not good at this part, and perhaps I'll be able to help you in the parts I'm good at. But here's something I wanted to get at with you. When I started, especially at Promise Keepers, which is where you and I met,
right.
I would stand in front of 10,000, 15,000 men.
Yep.
I would do comedy. I would lift up God. I would lift up this nation. I would talk about my values. I would talk about unapologetically Christian, unapologetically conservative, patriot, whatever. They would cheer. They would clap. They'd give me virtually every show I ever did, they got a standing ovation. It was ridiculous.
Yep.
But back in 2004, because 2003 is when my first year with them, and they said, man, this guy really resonates with these guys. Let's keep doing it. So 2004, I was back, and that was Bush-Kerry time, running for re-election. And I was pro-Bush at that point. I was a conservative and I was a Republican. And at that time, I was stupid enough and naive enough and foolish enough to think that Republicans were good people and that they were on my side or on the side of freedom in the Constitution. And I would say things within the midst of my laughter and jokes and monologue that referenced, I guess, Bush. I never said him out loud, but and they would cheer because they knew what I was getting at. It'd be like referencing Trump, back in the day. And I learned something that I'd heard from the guy that was running the show, and he said something to me, and it made sense. And I've used it ever since, sort of in my own perspective. And I tell people this when I perform at churches, because I do a lot of them. I said, I do not worship the United States of America. I worship Jesus Christ. Yeah. But I'm grateful for the United States of America. Amen. Because it has given me a freedom to worship without fear of being shot or killed or raped or burned in a hut like they do to our brothers in Pakistan and Turkey and India and Uganda and Nigeria, and all these horrible things happen to our brothers and sisters in Christ. And I think that is what I wanted to ask you this next question. So one of the knocks, especially during the Corona, and I bring that up because it was such an illumination of where people stood about how they saw this country, how they saw our faith, how they saw interacting with each other, how we were going to move forward with differences. So what I wanted to ask you was how Christian nationalism has become a dirty word. Where do you think the balance is? How do we, as Christians, take pride in our nation? Where is that healthy? Defend it. Where is that expected? And strive to maintain it. Where are we obligated? Without somehow trying to integrate the fact that my faith isn't a political system or a party system. It is separate and will even abandon Americans, leaders and whatnot, if they abandon Christian teaching and so forth. That's a tough little question, and that's where we really had a lot of conflict. So you were in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So what is the answer to national pride and making it appear to be synergizing our faith with our either political parties or our country?
That's a fabulous question. It's funny because my first year doing some of the Dare to Shares, stepping in for Greg, was 2003. So you were the first one I saw in Kansas City, Missouri. And there were 15,000 guys there, and I was overwhelmed that I was going to be up speaking to them shortly after you. And of course, I didn't know what was worse, following you when you brought the house down, or not following you, which because you loosened me up and made me feel great. I loved what you did, because I think what's so critical is humor, and I try to use humor, opens people's hearts to be able to discuss truth in a more reasonable way. You know, when tempers are hot, when we start getting political, it's impossible. People just have bents about politics and about their perspective, and everybody's perspective is their reality. So when it comes to nationalism, I watched a on the street reporter there in California just yesterday that was asking 20-somethings, what do you think of when you see a person wearing an American flag? And every single person said they're racists, they're Trump supporters, they're conservative Republicans and bigots. And I thought to myself, oh my word, how far have we fallen as a country that you can't even wear an American flag without being seen as a Trump supporter who's a racist bigot. So I go back to this. When the battle for me started very quickly, it didn't take me long to see that the approach the government was taking, which is 99% of the time the wrong approach, was absolutely wrong, and that the health professionals were approaching a virus that was COVID-19, not COVID-1, with this mentality that if you're a good American citizen, you'll do what we say. If you're a good American citizen, you'll bow to the premier of Dr. Fauci, or at that time, Trump's administration. And I thought, okay, now I have to be able to take a stand. And taking this stand, I know full well that some of the people in my ministry who are, maybe older, maybe younger, who believe everything that they're hearing, are going to instantly place me in a nationalist, only Trump category. And I had to somehow take this stand without it being I'm on this side or that side politically. And so what I did is I had this very unique situation, and I'll come back to the nationalist approach. The unique situation was, I'm good friends with Pastor Rick Warren. I've been a coaching pastor for Purpose-Driven Ministry for 27 years. I was the first of two pastors. We coach pastors around the world. And, the ministry there had sent two doctors that I know you'd be aware of. They had videos on YouTube early on, and they were saying, what are we doing? We need to, develop herd immunity. This is the wrong approach. And, they're practicing doctors. Well, they created a party line of doctors that began to converse on Thursdays, and they wanted a pastor to open in prayer and a pastor to, listen. And since I was here alone, because my entire staff was where every American was, home, thinking this is, the Black Plague, I said, okay, I'll do that. So I'd open in prayer, and then I'd listen. I'd listen to people much smarter than me, epidemiologists, virologists, practicing MDs. But the interesting part was, Brad, they were male and female and Christian and Jew and atheist and Democrat and Republican. It didn't matter. And a lot of the conversations was, the hemoglobin and I'm just like, whatever. But then all of a sudden they'd say, we are doing the wrong thing. If a person is elderly or they are vulnerable, we need to protect them. But the healthy need to live, and the healthy need to move forward. And it was the exact opposite message we were getting. And what you would hear from elites, from Google, from Facebook, from those who are controlling the narrative was, if you do anything different than Dr. Fauci and the NIH and the CDC say, you are a hateful, selfish truth denier. And I'm listening to practicing MDs that grew into the thousands going, who's right here? And I have a tendency to believe that the men and women who are actually working with patients every day, they're not career politicians, they're not, doctors that haven't seen a patient in 50 years, that are not necessarily in bed with big pharma, happen to be the people we should be listening to. And it only took me a little while before I was telling my wife and talking to my elder board that I said, guys, we got to stop this. We're going to open. We were trying to feed thousands of people in need with two volunteers who didn't even get within 6 feet of each other out the door every day. And I'm like, we can't maintain this. Church isn't a show. It's not a TV program. Church is fellowship, community. Yeah. It's worship, discipleship, ministry and mission. And so that's when I took a legal stance. That's when I had conversations with the leading epidemiologist in our state. And that's when I heard something from that person. And I'll be careful because there were lawsuits and everything. And I'm still standing, and I prefer to stay there. But a statement was made to me. Pastor Rick, we have 577 infections per 100,000. So if you have your people get together, you can only have 10. They have to be 6 feet apart in your auditorium that holds 1,000. I'm like, oh boy. Now, when we get to 277 infections per 100,000, you can have 50. Same rules. And when we get to 0 infections, you can open your church. And I went, time out. I'm a pastor. I'm not a moron. Yeah. We're never getting to 0. This is COVID. We're going to live with it. And I said, I'm opening. I'm opening June 7th. And honestly, we had started, I had already had my staff come back. We had already started ministry gatherings, but that was the big target. And, you know, I got fined hundreds of thousands of dollars. I got blasted. But, you know, Brad, that didn't bother me. What bothered me were pastors that I had been colleagues with and friends with and poured into them, who came out against me, who don't talk to me still today, who kept their churches closed for a year, for 16 months, and who said to me, you need to do what the government says. That's what being a good Christian is. And I vehemently disagreed. That's a misinterpretation of a very touchy subject in Romans 13. And that disappointed me. And that's where I started being labeled a radical nationalist pastor who only cares about conspiracy theories and not the truth. Now, today, you and I know full well, that the evidence is proving that everything we believed is true, and that what we're seeing today is vindication and validation, but it's only being slowly leaked out in certain areas, because to those who hate this country, to those who want this country to die and become part of a globalist one world country or government, their agenda is to destroy any pride and any love for the United States of America. And I think the way we approach it, the way we talk about it, and the way I talk about it with people is, listen, I'll be honest, I love this country. I've been all over different places in the world. I know what it's like to be in places where there's no freedom, where they don't have 1/10 of the resources we have, where they don't have the ability to provide for their families. I know what it's like. I've lived in the jungle for a month with nothing, and then kissed the ground of, Miami International Airport when I came home, because this is my home. This is a great country. But I'm honest about our failures. I'm honest about the continued struggles that we still have. I would be a fool to deny that there is prejudice and there is racism and there is bias, but I don't believe it's a systemic, institutionalized issue. It is a matter of the depravity of humanity, and the only way we're going to rid our culture of any prejudice, bias, or racism is when individual hearts are changed by the birth of salvation that comes by faith alone in Christ alone. And then I can have that honest conversation and say, yes, I love the country. It's not perfect, but I'm proud to be an American.
Tell them how much you were fined.
The last I heard was somewhere over $700,000. That was, again, what came from the health department when the person who at that time was head of the county health department screamed at me on a phone call and literally said this, Pastor, you need to make your people wear masks. And he was mad. And I said, I'm not going to force them to wear masks. I don't force them to come to church. It's their choice. And I said, they can wear masks. I will never make them feel bad about that, or they cannot wear masks. He goes, do you sing in your church? I said, you know that we do. He said, "You're a super spreader." I said, "Brother," no, I didn't say brother, but I said his name. I said, I'm not going to force my people to wear masks. And he said, "Then go ahead and murder your people." And I said, "I'm done." So my attorney said, "Don't worry about the fines, let it go." So far it hasn't caused me any issues, but it's probably way up above that now.
Okay, so first off, it's important that we recognize, like I said, the courage that was put into place when it was at its peak. It was easy to open your church a year later when you're kind of like, oh, okay, I guess there's enough out there that I can kind of fly under the radar and open my church. And, I got to tell you something, buddy. First off, I could never be a pastor. I think it's a calling. It's a very specific calling, and we know that's true. Some are called the pastor, teach, prophet, whatever. I know I've been called to be a prophet to the church, not to the. I'm not an evangelist. Not that I don't care about people's salvation, and people have been saved under my stuff, but that's not my strength. It's to people who think they're in, who aren't, or at least aren't committed and don't understand what's expected. That's my calling, to the people that are already going to church thinking I've done enough.
Yeah.
So you have a very specific calling, thus you have a very specific framework for how you navigate the people that God has given your charge. You have to be able to, frankly, I think the biggest challenge, and I'm not a pastor, I just known a lot, is dealing with the majority of churchgoers who are so childish and immature, and that I would either kill myself or kill them, one of the two, if I was a pastor. So God said, "No, I'll tell you what. Let's put you out in the desert. You can eat some bugs, wear some camel's hair. You can go be the freak show, and they'll come out and see you every now and again." And that's what I am. I'm the freak show. But I did. So I guess what I'm about to say is the caveat that it's easy to say when I'm not under the scrutiny that pastors actually are. But I said to the people, if you came to me as a pastor, and said, and this was the word that I felt was the flag that this cannot be obeyed. You are unessential.
That's right.
That word is what I needed to hear. You said, listen, can you be helpful? Can you be, neighborly, whatever. If they want to use some kind of term to kind of sugarcoat it and say, can you help us under this, challenge right now? Maybe they might have gotten a little bit more headway. But when you said I'm unessential, not a strip club, not Walmart, not Chinese, by the way, basically, are making the money off of Walmart. All the little guys are being destroyed. Not the bars.
Mm-hmm. Strip clubs.
But the church is unessential. I said, if you had the balls to say that to my face, not only would I have opened my doors, I would have ripped them off the hinges.
Exactly.
Nobody tells me the sanctuary is unessential. It is literally the single most essential venue in America right now, because people are scared, they're confused, and they need to know where sanctuary is.
Amen. Next door, Brad, next door to our church is a Walmart, ironically. And I was in that Walmart 3 weeks before I opened my church. I was standing in the aisle near the TVs. There were over 40 people in 2 aisles, crowded, jammed together, looking at TVs, looking at movies, looking at, little pieces of furniture. And I was like, this is safer than being in my auditorium, where there is space and where there's a 50-foot ceiling and where we have a system that destroys all viruses, including COVID. I'm like, that is just insane. And you're right. There's no such thing as saying God's work is non-essential. It's unessential. I think you hit it on the head. That's what did it for me. I'm like, what you're defining as essential and what you're defining as non-essential is absolutely upside down. And that tells me, and I'm saying this to all the people that are listening that might be a little bit upset because they think pastors should just cower and be humble and be pacifist. Yes, we should be humble, but being a pacifist, I leave that to Bonhoeffer. My approach is we have to stand, and I would say this, when they listen to me, those people that are listening now, I would say every time in church history for 2,000 years that persecution came on the church, there were only two pathways. One was backwards and one was forward. The one that was backwards was to completely abdicate to the government and literally lose Jesus in the midst of what we would call today a uniformity of some sort. Or the path forward was through the persecution. There is no way to avoid it. There's no way to get around it. And I've been there. And I think, sadly, those Christians that you mentioned, I've been attacked just recently now because we stepped in to buy this Christian school, building, and then start a new Christian school because we can't obviously keep it going. It's named by another church and under its leadership. And the moment that me personally and our ministry contracted on it, I saw an ugliness of Christians that I don't see here, Brad. I just don't see it in my church. And what happened was there were a few Pharisees that went back and looked at a sermon series I preached, which was for the specific purpose of making Christians learn how to deal with the LGBTQ, the environmental radicals, abortionists, politicians that are different than, or political views different than ours, and really the redefinition of the family. And I preached it from the approach of being unoffendable. Christians should not be offendable. They should be strong and loving and completely confident that what they believe is true, so that I can say to the LGBTQ community, I don't agree with this agenda. I don't agree with this lifestyle. I believe God created us one man and one woman for life, but I also agree you are God's creation, that Jesus died for all sins, and that no matter what that sin is, whether you're a gossip and a slanderer, as the same scripture mentions in 1 Corinthians 5 and 6, or your sexual sin is the predominant issue in your life, Jesus died for all. And these people relentlessly attacked me. And it was so amazing because the man that was becoming our superintendent, who had been the superintendent for the school where some of these parents' kids were involved, that we were buying, said, do they not understand that if you guys had not stepped in, there would be no school? And he knows where I stand. We've been friends for 27 years, the best of friends. But I share that story for this reason. Christians get really selfish, and they justify that selfishness by naming what they believe to be inaccuracies in a pastor's teaching or in the way he approaches a subject, essential or not. And then instead of handling it biblically, like, come to me, let's talk about it, they go to social media and they do exactly what they despise in the media today. That's what disgusts people about Christianity. We're shooting our own wounded.
Well, couldn't agree more. I would probably reframe we're shooting our own wounded to be the people that are shooting us aren't one of us. And this is, I think, the key that is is simply going to have to be grasped in this new season in America. I begin to say this lately. I don't know if you'd agree with it or not. I don't care. I say it because it's what I believe. But I said, I think we need to start understanding. Remember, we started this conversation with this idea that we're in civil war. I think we have to understand that there clearly are two groups of Americans as to how they see America, philosophically, ideologically. We've taken sides, blue and red, if you want to make it that simple. But what does that mean? And what I say is this. I think we have to understand going forward that there are now two groups. One are citizens of the United States of America, and the other group are Americans. Mm. You see, every American is a citizen. That's part of the deal. You join us, you become e pluribus unum out of many, one. You bring the best of your ethnicity, the best of your history, the best of your culture that you brought here. You melt into us, you learn our language, you love our traditions, you stand for us. Bring what you've learned and add it to this tapestry. We will become the greatest nation on earth. And it's why we became the greatest nation on earth, because all these other nations that were older brought amazing things to us.
That's right.
But they came to become part of this idea that nobody else had, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness, original draft, was private property. You must be able to own your own privacy so that you can't be controlled by a monarch or oligarchy or a militia, whatever. So American means this. You doesn't mean you deny your history. Nope. You know, it kills me when people say these idiotic things, how stupid Americans are. You know, well, you don't want to teach the real history of America. What do you mean? Slavery. I said, how do we all know that slavery existed? How do we all know it? Because we taught it in school. How do we all know that Abraham Lincoln gave us the Emancipation? How do we know that? Because it was taught in school. How do we know that Jim Crow existed and the Civil Rights Amendment passed? Because it was taught in school. Nobody's denying there was slavery. What we're denying is the Marxist cancerous lie that it is systemic, that they literally created a cultural milieu that stated everything that will ever come from this nation is based on white people getting power, because that's not what was true. And the reason I know that is because when the founding fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence, they were white European males with a Christian worldview. They may not have been Christians, but they used the Christian worldview.
That's right.
Slaves were not citizens. They couldn't vote. They had no rights, no question. Women couldn't vote, had no way to come in and bring some of their ideas and their thoughts to the political system because they couldn't vote. Okay, the only people that had influence, power, and the authority to create this new nation were white European men. That's the only ones that had any. If there was ever a time, to say, we find these truths to be self-evident that all white European straight Christian males were created equal, this was the time.
Right.
Do it now, so you will forever systemically have power. And they didn't.
That's right.
They said all men are created equal.
So
they
good.
Screwed up terribly if that's what they were trying to do. So it is not systemic racism that has infiltrated this nation. It's systemic narcissism. That is the absolute crux of the leftist, wokest nonsense that's destroying us. I have talked about the militia of the mind, Rick, and this is what I call it. I think what I feel God's telling me to do, and I've never really kind of said this because he's starting to show me, and so I want to get your thoughts because I respect your opinion as a brother in Christ and as a mentor, partner. I think what we have to do as Christians and patriots, you don't have to be a Christian to love this nation.
That's right.
Is find our battle in our little town or our little village or our little city or our little state, whatever, but find a place where our values are being destroyed, where they're fighting it. And much of it's going to have to do with the academia and the school system. That if that doesn't get squared away, all we're doing is taking our children and turn them into Marxists, and we can't survive because they'll be the next generation and they will destroy us. You already proved it when you said they looked at the American flag and saw that as evil. Well, that's just proved my point.
Yep.
But we're going to have to decide on a battle, and then you aggregate your folks who are willing to take the heat, risk their reputation, and say, we're going to end this in the name of freedom, First Amendment right, use our Constitution, use the freedoms given to us, and take these battles to head, like they've done in the school systems when the parents came in and ended up getting a Republican elected in Virginia, which we didn't see happen, because it showed what the power of the people is. Do not count on the Republicans. They're the worst of us because they're Judas. They're Judas. They're Judas. The left owns the Democrats. There's no question. That's demonic. No question. Hey, Rick, Satan's already been judged. I already know what's going on. I already know what the demons are. I already know what that battle is. I know how to fight that.
Yeah.
But don't tell me you're on my side. You'll represent my voice and then stab me in the back. Judas to me is worse than a demon.
Yeah.
Because I know what I'm getting at, but you told me you're on my side. So don't wait for the Democrats, the Republicans, the conservatives, the patriots, the militia. Don't wait for them to save you.
That's right.
We have to change, our heart. There has to be a third great awakening in this nation. If people don't become Christ followers and commit this idea that our lives and our virtue and our morals are going to have to come from us individually, if we don't find that, again, we're dead. We cannot survive. It will not work.
Nope.
And then we mobilize and we are unrelenting. We draw lines in the sand. You will not cut off the breasts of a 12-year-old girl.
Gosh.
You're not doing it.
No.
And we will make sure your license is stripped, and then you will go to prison.
Yeah.
It's going to have to cost people, or we will consider to see the butchery and the mutilation of children. We're going to consider to see the mutilation of freedom and so forth.
That's right.
And so this is kind of where I'm going with it. I'm not sure how to create this movement as far as getting it infiltrated, but I think it's just going to be organic like this as we understand the vision, and then how to go about it, give people marching orders, and then put it into place. Well, listen, buddy, I know that you have to get out of here in a few minutes, so let me ask you two questions to leave you with, okay? First question is this. I have to presume that there were a lot of pastors out there in the United States who shut down, who some of them lost their churches because all the people left and found churches like yours and went there. So a lot of the churches that stayed open have blown up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other ones have died. And my thinking is, I'm glad. They needed to be weeded out. They were posers. They were cowards. That's not Christianity. They needed to be weeded out. But some were pastors that were maybe young, or maybe they didn't know what to do. And they made a call trying to serve God. They didn't mean any malice. They loved Jesus. They're doing the best they can. And they probably are looking backwards going, I screwed up. I failed. Right. I failed my God. I failed my character. I failed my community. I failed my people. And they're beating themselves up. And maybe they feel unworthy of continuing as a pastor. You didn't succumb. You didn't bow the knee. They need you to give them some redemption and some hope as to move forward from a pastor who loves them and knows what it's like to be in their shoes. What would you tell them?
Wow. Well stated. I would first say this, that I love pastors. I mean, I mentioned that I've had the privilege of coaching, somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 pastors worldwide, just on how to be a purpose-driven pastor, how to be a pastor that communicates the gospel, how to create an environment in your church where everybody's welcome to come, to belong, to become a disciple of Christ in that journey. So I'm passionate about them. I think that my response to, and I have had the privilege of talking to some of those pastors in our community, and the ones that are humble, which we all should be, because we're servants and shepherds. We're not celebrities and kings. And I just have met with them for breakfast or lunch, and I say, hey, if I had a penny for every mistake I've made in 38 years, I'd be a billionaire. Most of the great things that have happened in this ministry have come from the multitude of mistakes that propelled me to make a good decision. So use this and make sure that you drive a stake in the ground that says, this is where I've come since I abdicated to the government and to this insanity, and I'm never going back there again. Because you can be sure, Brad, you're as aware as you're more aware than I am, most likely, that now they're going to start climate lockdowns. I mean, that's their next agenda. That's out there in the World Health Organization. That's being spoken in the World Economic Forum. I mean, this isn't a conspiracy. And so they noticed that their geo-tracking and their climate measurement was a lot less impacted by having us sit in our homes and do nothing, which has resulted in 7 million 20 to 30-year-old capable working males doing nothing in this country. And I would say to those pastors, you have to lead those people. And if you lose men who are called to be leaders, then you lose this country. So you have to say, I'll never go back. And I've said to some of them, apologize to your church. Say to them, I felt wrong. That looks as if the church needs to step back. And, I agree wholeheartedly that the church should not be the reactive force. We should be the intentional lead in everything that's happening in our culture. We should be the ones, the church 150 years ago was the place that people went for everything. The sanctuary, the gatherings for the town, they found their hope there. And man, when we came back in June, it was a week after we had 5 teenagers attempt suicide in 1 week. 12-year-old girl all the way up to a 19-year-old boy. Thank God they all failed. But it told me what I already knew, and that is that we have created a generation of children and teenagers that see no hope. There is no hope. I mean, if your parents are rolling over and all they care about is their own health, what kind of world have we created? I mean, I remember my parents, when we got sick, they didn't care about their health. They cared about us, my brother, myself, and 14 teenage girls they took care of. So we need to get that back. So I would say to those pastors, apologize, drive the stake in the ground, and then let it go. Don't beat yourself up. Don't be overwhelmed with grief. Jesus died for the guilt of our sin, and he died for our shame, and we need to leave it there.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, it's kind of like the odd scenario about, somebody saying, well, what do you know about this? You did that. So why should I listen to you? Like kids sometimes will say to their parents,
Yep.
well, you did that. You had sex before marriage. So what do you have to tell me? And it's kind of like going to an AA meeting and saying, listen, I don't need this. And you're like, well, why not? It's because the people leading me are alcoholics.
Yeah.
What do they know? And it's like, that's exactly Who needs to lead you? I've been there. I've overcome it. Now you don't get an excuse for staying stuck. Repent, get up, brush yourself off, grab your sword, and be twice as powerful now because you learned what it was like to give in, to compromise. It will never happen again. And now I'm very aware and sensitive to if they're going to try to impose this upon me next time, the warning signs, and then being able to fight back against it. So that's a wonderful thing. I'm going to have you give me one more question, and then I'm going to let you go. And thank you so much for coming on, brother. I've always loved talking to you. I can't wait to get back to your church one of these days.
Yes.
But most importantly, right now, I'm building this podcast. It's growing. I don't know why, but God, I know it's part of my ministry. I know it's part of my commitment to the church and my prophecy, be a prophet to the church, but also to this season, to be a missionary to America. That's my call. I didn't know that's what I was going to become as a comic. I didn't shoot for that. It was not my desire. I wanted to just be a comedian, but there was something more important. And that's what I've committed my life to. And it's cost me, the mainstream accolades and money. I'm never going to have that. Who cares? My reward will be in heaven. I'm doing what God has asked me to do. Amen. But if you were to give marching orders to Christians with the understanding of what's coming, where we're at, the persecution, the oppression, and what it means to stand for truth and the gospel in the United States, the last bastion of hope and freedom in earth, and that Christians are literally the last truth tellers left on earth, or we're supposed to be. What would you tell Christians in America? How to fight back to defend liberty, freedom, and our faith?
Well, I would go back to something you just said. You said, I'm a missionary to America. You and I spoke in Promise Keepers in 2003, and Dr. Erwin Lutzer shared on that conference. I sat in the green room with him and was like sitting at the feet of the Apostle Paul for me. And he said, do you know what country China, the underground church of China, has sent 100,000 Christian missionaries to? America. And that was 20 years ago, Brad. 20 years ago, they saw the need to reach America with the gospel. That means today we need Jesus more than we did 20 years ago. And we are seeing this in the church, in the so-called Christian community. I think when Paul the Apostle said, I can do nothing but preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. I am constrained to preach the good news of Christ crucified. When Paul says in 1 Corinthians 14, hey guys, I would rather speak 5 words in a known language than 10,000 in an unknown tongue. And those 5 words are in 1 Corinthians 15 that says, Christ died for our sins. Our marching orders have been given. The marching order is that until people are transformed by the gospel, until a person comes to the end of themselves and repents by saying, I change my mind about who Jesus is. I confess that I'm a sinner, that my sin is a direct assault on the character of God, that I am empty of any goodness. I can do nothing to save myself. And I believe that Jesus Christ died and rose again and offers everlasting life, and I trust in him alone to save me. Until that happens, the church is powerless, because people who go to church, who say they're the church because they give their money and they attend and they look spiritual, whatever that means, and they don't talk like other people because they're better than them and they're more charitable, and they think that their good works are what makes them a Christian, they are truly the most deceived people on earth. Galatians 2:21 says, I do not set aside the grace of God. If righteousness could be attained by obedience to the law, Christ died in vain. The church will not have the power to transform the world until Romans 1:16 transforms them. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is the power, the dunamis, and it's not dynamite. That's a terrible illustration. Dunamis is about the power that spoke the universe into existence, the power of God unto salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and everybody else. So my challenge is, don't ever let anyone, the government, president, China, if they overtake us, tell you that you cannot share the gospel of Jesus with the community that needs him. Because if you do, you are no different than the atheist who says there is no God. That's what Scripture tells us. Like the non-believer, you are no different. So that is my challenge. And when that passion beats inside of every pastor and every church, then we will be a city on a hill. We will be the place people look and say, there is love there. There is hope there. There is purpose there. I want to be where they are, instead of, oh, well, if I had to define Christians, they're racist, they're prejudiced, they're hypocrites, they're no different. And that's got to change. We need to be known for what we're for: the gospel, the love of God, transforming power of the Holy Spirit, the truth of his word, and not what we're against. Stop being defined for what we're against. I love these honest conversations. I love what you do. Man, I love getting in there, causing people's hair to stand up a little bit, getting them to the point where they go, okay, maybe there is another perspective other than mine, and then prepping them for heart surgery so that the gospel can come in, transform their thinking, their vision, and their life. And then we win not only this country, but the world to Jesus. I mean, I'll end with this. I love this illustration. You've heard it. I've used it before. When Coca-Cola was invented by a pharmacist who decided to take a brown syrup and put it with some fizzy water, and he carried it down to his pharmacy less than a mile from his house, and he began to sell Coca-Cola. It became very popular, and he decided that his goal would be to ensure that every person in the world would taste Coca-Cola. Within 89 years, Coca-Cola, a sign and the name, have been viewed by 97% of the world's population. I know. I've been floating down the Amazon River in the most obscure places and seen a Coke bottle, a Coke can, a Coke sign. But what's extraordinary is that 78% of the world had actually held a Coke can, and 59% of the world had actually drank Coca-Cola. They accomplished in less than 100 years what the church has not even come close to in 2000. We have to change that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Two things in response. One was the idea of atheism is congruent with believers who know the truth and don't speak it. You've done the same thing. So I know the truth and don't speak it. I've done exactly what an atheist does. I've basically said there's nothing worth pursuing here.
That's right.
And boy, are we going to need more bold witnesses. And the other idea of Coke, that's a very fascinating concept. Though I will say this, Jesus is a little harder to swallow than Coke.
Right.
It's
Right.
easy to give people sweet, easy to drink syrup.
Yeah.
But Jesus is meat, and
That's right.
and he's and there's a lot of folks that don't want what he has to offer because it means
Well put.
they have to humble themselves, and there's nothing great more powerful than the original sin, pride.
Amen.
Well, listen, brother, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for being on with me. It's been amazing. I look forward to, like I said, just fighting with you somehow down the
Yes.
road and seeing what God might have in store for us. But thank you for being a warrior pastor and being on the Warrior Pastor series. And hopefully this can be a catalyst to just really get generals and infantry believers together in this nation and fighting for truth, righteousness until we die, because God wins every time.
Amen. Thank you, brother. I love you. We will be together soon, and just appreciate you.
Amen.
Take care.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. Perfect, beautiful, amazing. Yeah, I'm gonna maybe need your thoughts down the road on this militia of the mind idea, but I really feel like to me it's a grassroots thing, taking a subject in your community and fighting. For example, like at Indiana University, I was thinking about this. They have this statue to Kinsey. Well, he was a pet. He was a
pedophile.
Yeah, he was a pedophile and raped babies. So
Yes.
I want to basically go to IU and say, take this frickin' statue down.
Yeah.
This thing. You take down Jefferson, leave this pedophile, sexual deviant, and start sort of building communities that stand for these moral principles to show that we also have a voice. I don't know what this means or how effective it'll be, but I think if it gives people something to fight for, maybe it'll teach them to be bolder and to stand for something. So that's kind of what I think God is showing me. I don't have all the details, so I'd love to get guys like you who've been in ministry and put things like this into action to help me understand how to move forward in this new world of mine of ministry that's brand new for me. So
man, I love it. I love it. Anything I can do, I will do it. You can pray for us as I'm, I never thought I would step into a $12 million deal and still need to raise another $5 million. I came back to my church and said, guys, we're in this capital campaign that was 3 to 4 years to raise 20 to 30 million and build a beautiful center of hope on our property. And God changed our plans. The building's already built. It's 4 miles away. You're not going to have it on your property, but we're still going to use it as the center of hope. And we get to start a Christian high school. Good news is it's only about 12 million with about 5 million in soft costs that we'll have to add to that. The bad news is I need it in 3 weeks. And they started giving, and we've raised about 5.5 million above our offering in about 5 weeks.
Wow.
But man, I got to raise another 6 million before the closing on April 28th. And I just keep going, God, show your power. And I believe he's going to do it. And it's every day, man, all the way from writing mission statement, vision statement, the culture contract, where we're going to put verses in the building, what we're going to do in the Bible class. I mean, it is just crazy. So pray for that, and I'll hopefully have a great update for you the next time we're together.
I guarantee you will. Like I said, God wins every time. So
you're
not, man, brother, but it's always challenging when you're in the middle of it, but you'll get through. You've been there before.
Yeah.
You have some proof of concept. You've fought this battle before. Hey, God bless you, brother. Have a great one, and stay in touch, buddy.
We will. Take care. Okay, see you, Brad.
So there you have it. That's Rick Long, an amazing pastor, an amazing man, and hopefully an inspiration to all of you folks. We must decide once and for all if America is worth fighting for and dying for. I mean, it will not take care of itself. It's not. America is a concept. It's a philosophy. It's a creed. It cannot survive out on its own. It can only be out in the ethers, prepared for those who want to use it existentially and fight for it. Liberty is so important. Free speech is so important. First Amendment rights are so important. If you want to remain freedom and not have a World Economic Forum destroying our Constitution and literally ruling us, people who are despicable human beings who want to have power and authority and basically be your master and enslave you, they will do it with relish as they eat their caviar and fly in their planes. They'll make sure that you live off of solar power and eat bugs. These people must be fought and ground into nothing We have to fight against evil, or we will succumb to it. Folks, political correctness, as you know, is from the Frankfurt School. It is cultural Marxism. It has destroyed America, and all we have a chance is to put some salve on this wound, stop the bleeding, and see if we can regenerate this dying entity and bring it back to robust strength. So, if somebody says, hey, you're politically incorrect, always say thank you for the compliment, because PC-free is liberty, and we need to get used to that. Folks, I am God's Comic Brad Stine. Thank you for coming. Thank you for watching. Share, share, share. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Get on here and follow me on Facebook, and prepare to join us as we fight like never before for maybe our last stand on earth as the last truth tellers that's left. God's Comic Brad Stine saying, hey, folks, all I'm doing is putting the woke back to sleep. God bless you.